I think all of you know very well that we live in a world in which knowledge is exploding. Let's see if I can move it to the next slide there. Kind of a cartoon here. I had no idea about the following things, but this is the truth. Do you want to guess how many emails are sent every single day? The number is 250 million are sent every minute. 250 million emails every minute, which means 333 billion emails every day. This one, I don't even know what a zettabyte is. But this much I checked up. There are megabytes, and then gigabytes, and then terabytes, and then petabytes, and then exabytes, and then zettabytes. One with 21 zeros. 181 zettabytes of data were generated in 2025. But this is the one that's the killer. Knowledge doubles every 100 years until 1900. Every 25 years by 1945. Every 12 to 13 months by 1982. And the estimate of 2020, that's 5 years ago. Knowledge doubles every 12 hours. Knowledge doubles every 12 hours. That's unbelievable. Why? Well, that's easy. The reason is we human beings are made in the image of God. We are, it's part and parcel of human nature that we have this insatiable urge as being a human being for knowledge, trying to figure things out, how to understand how life on planet Earth works. We're desperate to try to find out what is the meaning of life. Why are we here? Why is anything here? Because we're human beings, and we're made in the image of God. Now you would think that with this incredible explosion of information with which our world is flooded today, there would be a corresponding explosion of human wisdom, wouldn't you? I mean, come on. Knowledge doubles every 12 hours? You'd think that we'd become much, much wiser. However, I think you can make a case for, in many ways, that's not true. Though knowledge is exploding, and will continue to do so, wisdom doesn't seem to explode in the same way at all. And today we're going to look at a passage from the Bible in which the teacher, or as the Bible calls him, the preacher, is going to explode the image of knowledge being the basis of us coming to understand the meaning of life. And so, I'm sorry I didn't get the next slide. Joshua, if you can help me. The sermon today is going to be on the illusion of figuring it all out, and the reality of living wisely in a twisted world. By the way, the optical illusion in the previous slide, and I think I'm not working very well, there we go. It kind of looks like it's moving at times if you look at it. It's not. It's stable, but it's an illusion. The illusion is that we can find the center, the core of meaning in life, but the truth is, unfortunately, we've not done a very good job at all. And so today, join me in the book of Ecclesiastes as we deal with the subject of wisdom. Our teacher is going to be Solomon. Actually, we noticed last week that Solomon doesn't tell us his name. He simply calls himself the preacher or the teacher or the professor. Koholeth is the Hebrew word. The professor is going to search far and wide, and over again we find that phrase in the book of Ecclesiastes 29 times, under the sun. He's going to look at life under the sun. By that he means under heaven, excluding eternity, excluding immortality, excluding God. If all we have is life on this planet, what do we find? We're going to search far and wide for the meaning of life. And we're going to use all kinds of ways to try to find the meaning of life. And of course, the main way we use in our world today is the way of knowledge, the way of wisdom, the way of education, the way of understanding. Because in that, we think we're going to find the meaning of life. And Solomon is going to tell us otherwise. So he's going to state his qualifications. I, the preacher. Now, we preachers aren't known to be the smartest people on the planet, but if you see that word preacher, it also means professor. He's a professor. He's a very, very smart man. And then it says, have been king over Israel. Now, as a king, he is in a position where he has access to massive knowledge, and he has a security clearance. He has access to anything he wants to know. So his position makes a big deal. And then he said, I applied my heart. When I made this search for the meaning of life using wisdom, I devoted the central part of who I am to seek it out and to search out by wisdom all. He said, my search is comprehensive. I checked out everything I knew. And remember last week what a brilliant man he was in the sciences, in literature, in religion, in money, in sex, in all of these. This man has experienced it all. He said, I checked out everything done under heaven again. Remember, under the sun, to try to find out how life works. I said in my heart, I have acquired great wisdom. How great? Surpassing all who were in Jerusalem before me. And my heart has great experience of wisdom and knowledge. And I applied my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. Now, you might wonder, what is he talking about there, about madness and folly? I don't know. I'm older than most of you by far. But I grew up, I was in high school in the 1960s. And I know some of you were not born. Most of you were not born in the 1960s. But in the 1960s, there was a major, major rebellion, not only in the United States, but all over the world. And one of the main people, he was a professor, who says the reason that we don't understand life is because we are not taking drugs. You see, the way that you understand life, and here's the major phrase, turn on, tune in, and drop out. Timothy Leary, he was a professor. He said, by taking LSD, that's where you start to understand the meaning of life. And so, you see, they're not only people that say you understand the meaning of life by philosophy and education and science. There's a whole nother branch of people that say, no, you understanding the meaning of life by nihilism and absurdity and folly and drugs. That's how you find the meaning of life. And Solomon told us, because remember, he's very, very holistic. I did both. I knew Timothy Leary, God said, was going to come 3,000 years from now. And Timothy Leary was going to tell people, oh no, you find the meaning to life in altered states of consciousness. And so Solomon even pursued folly. And his conclusion, it's like trying to grab some smoke and put it into your pocket. It evaporates, it's gone. It is not there. So I turn to consider wisdom and madness and folly. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Here's another passage from 1 Kings, just to give you some hint. These are the historical writings of the Bible. And God gave Solomon wisdom and understanding beyond measure, and breadth of mind like the sand on the seashore, so that Solomon's wisdom surpassed the wisdom of all the people of the East and all the wisdom of Egypt. And remember, around this time and much earlier, Egypt was the centerpiece of wisdom and knowledge in the world. And he far surpassed all of that. Charles Swindoll, he's a pastor in the United States. He wrote this: "This is the journal of a man who stopped at nothing when he sought to explore. By human wisdom, all things under the heavens. Remember, there was no limit to his brains and no limit to his bucks. No limitations, no reservations, just thorough research, full investigation." So here's the man who is going to make the search for us. And he is well qualified. And now, having established that he has the credentials to speak on the subject of intelligence, education, wisdom, and their application to the search for the meaning of life, he is now going to point out some of the limitations and the problems with that search. He's going to list quite a number of them. You will see them easily. Here's the downside of wisdom. As you look at this, can you pick out the four that he outlines? In these few verses, he's going to enumerate for us four downsides of wisdom. Wisdom's pursuit for the meaning of life. Number one, it is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. Now that is an incredibly important statement, because what Solomon is saying is that behind this search for wisdom under the sun is a God above the heavens who has made it so that we can't figure it out. And then he says, I have seen everything that is done under the sun, and behold, here's the second reason. It is vanity and a striving after wind. It's like trying to grab smoke or catch the wind in your hand, and you can't do it. Here's the third reason. What is crooked cannot be made straight. And here's the fourth reason. What is lacking cannot be counted. That's what he says. By the way, this is the first time that God has been mentioned in the book of Ecclesiastes. And it's the name for God, God's covenant name, Elohim, the name that God gave in the book of Genesis in the Bible. There are parts of the riddle to the meaning of life that God, for a reason, has chosen not to reveal to us. That's what he says. Let's look at these one by one. Number one, it is an unhappy business. Someone wrote this: philosophy is the study that enables a person to be unhappy more intelligently. Interesting. Yes. Why? Well, I don't know. I'm not a great student of philosophy, though I have taught it a little bit. But I have noticed throughout philosophy, especially more modern philosophy, that it's a pretty unhappy lot of people. Because they basically come up with there is no meaning to life other than live a heroic life yourself and die and go back and become worm food. That's basically the gist of it. It is not a happy pursuit. It's the first thing he says, and we'll get back to that in a minute. And the second thing he says is it's vanity. No matter how hard you try, you're ultimately going to hit a brick wall, because this search for the meaning of life using your brain under heaven without God being involved in the picture, you will not be able to figure it out. And that's pretty clear from almost every field of endeavor today. The third reason is that, oh, by the way, you know the famous statement of Socrates, the great philosopher, who was asked, the oracle of Delphi, I believe it was, says, you're the wisest man in the world. And they said, well, why would the oracle say that you're so wise? And then Socrates said, the only true wisdom is in knowing that you do not know. He said, that's where wisdom is found. Wisdom is found when you realize how little you actually do know. That is where wisdom is found. And then it says, you cannot straighten out what is crooked. Sin has irretrievably twisted everything on planet Earth. There's no amount of investigation, no amount of knowledge, no amount of wisdom that is going to make up for things that are deficient and twisted, perverted, crooked, upside down. Charles Swindoll again said this: if intellectualism were the major key to purpose and fulfillment, our campuses would be Camelots of peace. People would gravitate to those campuses, finding there the fulfillment of their dreams. But they are not known to be such places in our world today. It just can't make what's crooked straight. And the fourth one is about mathematics. He said that you can't, the numbers don't add up. I like to think of it like this. If you're putting together a puzzle and some of the pieces are missing, you can't finish the puzzle because there's some of the pieces that you do not have. Or if you have an equation and some essential pieces of that equation are not available, it's extremely frustrating. The math doesn't work. I remember an interesting experience I had some years ago. I was in Jerusalem, and I was going through a place called Yad Vashem. Yad Vashem is the Holocaust Memorial. It is a terrible place, horrible. It's full of pictures in room after room of horrible, horrible pictures that you never want to see, and you don't think they're real, but they are. I went through that place with a man who was an Israeli Jew, but not a religious Jew, and not a Christian at all. And as we walked through this place together, horrified by the pictures that we saw, we finally got to the end, and he said this to me. He said, Tom, it just doesn't add up. It doesn't add up. He said, I've been through this place hundreds of times. And what it does in that museum is it tries to say that this was a factor involved, and this is a factor, and this is a factor. But he said, it doesn't add up. There's no way to make the math work. Why this happened? I didn't say to him, and I feel bad that I didn't, but I should have said, it doesn't add up Because the most important factor in this equation you do not believe in, which is in the cosmic struggle between good and evil. You don't believe in that. Read the book of Daniel. There are things going on right now in the cosmos, in the heavenlies, we do not see. Thank God we do not see them. There's a spiritual warfare going on that's incredibly bad. Thankfully, God wins, ultimately. But because that peace was not available to him, he did not believe in it, it doesn't add up because it doesn't add up. That's the reality. It doesn't add up. We think that wisdom will help us arrive at the meaning of life under the sun. But it turns out not to be so. Why? Why not? Because the why of life is above our pay grade as human beings. We don't understand the why of life under the sun. But Solomon is going to add a fifth reason. For in much wisdom is much vexation, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. We have a statement in English. We say it, and I think those of you, all of us speak English, or most of us here, we call it, ignorance is bliss. If you don't know things, you oftentimes can live a very peaceful life. I have never heard anyone say, maybe I'm the first to ever say it, intelligence is bliss. Never heard that. Why? Because it's not. Ignorance is bliss. This week I did something very sad. I went on the internet and I looked at the members of the 27 Club. How many of you have heard of the 27 Club? Oh, good. Young people have. I think it can safely be said that the people in any society who best understand the angst of the society, who best understand the longing for things to be right and the realization that they're not right, the best people in any society to do that are our musicians. Something about musicians. They can do things and say things that most of the rest of us can't. Well, as I said, I'm an American. And when I grew up, famous musician after famous musician, one after another, died tragically at the age of 27, including Jimi Hendrix, one of the greatest guitar players that's ever taken up the strings. He died from barbiturate intoxication. Janis Joplin, 27, died from a heroin overdose. Jim Morrison, the vocalist for The Doors, died at 27 from a heroin overdose. Kurt Cobain, frontman for Nirvana, died at 27 by suicide. Amy Winehouse, for the Brits among us, died at age 27 by alcohol poisoning. These are some of our best people in the world able to understand this. There's a lot of vexation. They suffered, obviously, a lot of sorrow. Now, I could add some. You see, one of the other dangers, there are two additional dangers with wisdom, is that there is no direct or necessary connection between intelligence, wisdom, education, and actually putting that wisdom to practice. Who's the best example? Solomon himself. Here's one of the smartest men that's ever lived. Here's one of the wisest men that's ever lived, whose wisdom came from God. And what did he do? married 700 women and had 300 concubines. Now that is stupid. That is like the greatest stupidity in the history of the world. From the wisest guy. There is not a connection. One of the articles, if you go on the internet, you'll find a rash of articles entitled, "Why Smart People Do Stupid Things." It's very normal for people with great intelligence to do incredibly dumb things. Nor is there any connection between wisdom, intelligence, and morality. When you see movies sometimes of the Nazi era, and you felt it here in Norway in a big way, you think that the Nazis are a bunch of thugs, a bunch of uneducated people that followed this nutcase Adolf Hitler. But did you know that physicians were one of the most important groups that supported the Nazis? As did lawyers and intellectuals. Did you know that when Hitler rose to power in the 1930s in Germany, Germany was the most cultivated and certainly the world's best educated country? They had the finest elementary school system, the highest literacy rate, the best universities. By 1913, more books were published annually in Germany than any other country in the world. They had amazing technical skill and relentless business savvy. And someone said what it made was more clever devils. You see, there is not a necessary connection between wisdom and morality, or between wisdom and living wisely. Now, lest you think that Solomon only sees the downside, you're wrong. There's an upside as well. There's got to be an upside. After all, this man wrote Proverbs. He tells people how to live wisely in this world. So he obviously must believe there's an upside to wisdom, and here it goes. So I turn to consider wisdom and madness and folly. There's the whole picture again. For what can the man do who comes after the king? Only what has already been done. Then I saw that there is more gain in wisdom than in folly, as there is more gain in light than in darkness. The wise person has his eyes in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. Well, thank you, Solomon. You give us a little bit of hope at all. He said, using one's brain to try to figure things out is better than not using your brain to figure things out. Using your brain for good is better than misusing your brain for things that are bad. But So using one's brain is actually a very, very good thing to do, because it helps you live a good life under the sun. Misusing your brain does quite the opposite, but it's not without a downside, and here's the downside. And yet I have perceived that the same event happens to all of them. Then I said in my heart, what happens to the fool will happen to me also. The smartest person in town, when they die, is going to be exactly the same as the village idiot. No different. So then why have I been so wise? And I said in my heart, this also is vanity. For the wise, as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies, just like the fool. So it's an additional downside of that. Though, of course, Solomon does say in the Proverbs, he begins, the fear of the Lord. Now remember, he's going above the sun. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, he says. And then he says in chapter 2, for the Lord gives wisdom, and from his mouth come knowledge and understanding. You see, Solomon understood that if you take God out of the picture, life without God doesn't ultimately make sense. And it's pretty painful trying to figure it out. But when you put God into the picture, everything changes. And so I'm going to look for a few minutes at above the sun wisdom. And we're going to have three sources. They're pretty good sources, I think you'll agree with me. Source number one is Jesus. Source number two is the Apostle Paul. And source number three is Jesus' brother, James. Let's start with Jesus. These are the words of Jesus. He's speaking to the people, his own people, the Jewish people. And he says, the Queen of the South. Who's that? It's the Queen of Sheba from Africa. He says, the Queen of the South one day will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it. For she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And behold, something greater than Solomon is here. That'll get you killed. And it did. It got him killed. Someone greater than Solomon is here. Do you remember what Jesus did when he preached his most famous sermon? He speaks in front of this large crowd of people, and he begins this way. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are the sad, or those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness' sake. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the peacemakers, and blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. You say, Jesus, what's wrong with you? That's all upside down. And if Jesus was here, he would say, yes, you are all upside down. That's what sin has done. It's just twisted. But above the sun, everything's different than it is down here. And someone greater than Solomon is in your midst, and you're not listening to him, he says. The Apostle Paul weighed in. You see, the Apostle Paul was writing to the people in Corinth, and Corinth is just south of Athens, the centerpiece of the intelligentsia of the history of the world. Socrates, Aristotle, Pericles, Plato, Aristophanes, Euripides. And in that milieu of the smartest people, the wisest country in the world, he says, the message of the cross is foolishness to you who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. He says, for the Greeks, they look for philosophical sophistication. And the Jewish people, they look for great acts of military might. But we preach Jesus Christ, a peasant, crucified, the ultimate act of impotence, who's a stumbling block to the Jews and nonsense to the Greeks. But the foolishness of God is wiser than man's wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than men's strength. He goes on in that passage, by the way. He goes on and says, not only is our message foolishness, but the messengers of the message, that's us. We're foolish too. He says, think of who you were. This is Paul writing. Not many of you are wise by human standards, not many influential, not many of noble birth, but God chose the foolish things of this world to shame the wise. He chose the weak things to shame the strong. And then Paul says, consider me. I didn't come to you as some eloquent great orator. I came to you in weakness and fear. I was scared when I came here. I was trembling. No, God doesn't use our methods. But guess what? They work. And then Jesus' brother wrote this: if any of you lacks wisdom, don't look only under the sun. Look above. Ask God, who gives generously and without reproach. This came to me very clearly and painfully one day a number of years ago. Remember the statement? It says this: it is an unhappy business that God has given to the children of men to be busy with. God wrote that. And by the way, here's what happened to me. Back in 1992, I mentioned last week, I had a daughter that had cancer. She was 3 years old. It was extremely painful for our family because she went through 2.5 years of chemotherapy and was on death's door many times. And what happened is I had to go into the the hospital in Denver, Colorado with my little girl, and she would be given spinal taps. And the doctors would put needles into her back and put chemotherapy into her spinal column. And my daughter is sitting on a table with her legs dangling toward me, and I'm in front of my daughter. Her name is Priscilla. And my little girl is screaming. Any 3-year-old would scream, "Daddy, Daddy, stop! Why are they doing this to me? Daddy, stop!" I could have said, "Priscilla, it's your leukocytes. Your white blood cells are overwhelming your red blood cells," and I could have gone on and given a simple definition of leukemia, not one word of which she could understand. Dr. Odom, who was the chief of oncology at Children's Hospital in Denver, was the one administering the spinal tap. She could have given an incredibly detailed explanation of leukemia, but a 3-year-old cannot understand white blood cells. It's impossible. They don't have the intellectual capacity to do so. But you see, the distance between my 3-year-old and me, or even Dr. Odom, and us and God is a world of difference. You see, when God acts, he has 10 zettabytes. He has a billion zettabytes of information that he has access to. And he's putting all his algorithms together perfectly to bring it to conclusion in Jesus Christ one day. But he can't explain it to us. It's impossible. Why is impossible? And so my little girl, as she's screaming, she said, "Daddy, can I pull your hair?" And I said, "Priscilla, you pull anything you want." And she just pulled my hair as the doctor put needles into her back. You see, God can't answer the why question. It's impossible. The question is not why. The important question is who, not why. When Job asks the why question, God doesn't answer him. God says, "Job, can you make a horse? Can you make stars in the heavens?" Once, when you start making horses and put up stars, maybe let's talk. But until then, trust me. Trust me. And Job goes, I put my hand over my mouth. He got it. The real issue is not why, because we can't understand why. It's way too big for us. But for us under the sun, understanding heaven, the key is, who can we trust? For the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at the illusion of partying hardy and of working harder. And we'll see what Solomon says about them.